Hello and welcome to Getting Your Ducks in a Row, the podcast for the built environment brought to you by the Dux Digital. This is episode 17, and normally you'd be hearing the familiar voice of our co-founder Jason Windle guiding these conversations. But today it's me, Mike Windle, stepping into the host chair for the very first time. For my debut episode, I'll be joined by someone I met earlier this year at Future Build, and have since had the pleasure of working with on some really exciting projects, Angelos Chronis. Angelos is an architect, researcher and entrepreneur who spent the past 15 years at the intersection of architecture, technology and climate. He's now the co-founder of Infrared City, a startup making climate simulations accessible through AI. Or, in simple terms, helping architects and planners design more sustainable, livable cities. We cover a lot in this episode, from Angelos' academic journey, the role of AI in reshaping the built environment, to the not-so-small matter of how our cities will cope with climate change. It's a fascinating chat, and I couldn't have asked for a better first guest. So let's get into it. Hi, Angelos. How are you doing?
Good. I'm good. How are you?
Yes, I'm very good. Thank you. Welcome to the show. For the listeners' context, me and Angelos met at Future Build, where we have since started working together on multiple projects now, and you have kindly agreed to come on the show and share with us your experience in what you're doing and the projects you're working on. So with no further ado, should we jump straight in and let our viewers know your background and the sort of things that you've been working on?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm an architect by training. I'm in the intersection of architecture, technology, and the climate for the past 15 years or so. My goal has always been to bring technology into architecture planning in order to get into a more sustainable, more livable built environment. So helping buildings become more sustainable, more climate friendly. And I've always worked mainly on integrating what we call climate simulations, environmental simulations, essentially these analytics tools that help architects make decisions on their buildings and cities designs. And I started in Greece, where I'm from. I studied architecture there. I moved to London. I studied computing in architecture, worked for Foster and Partners, our architecture firm for a while, taught at UCL. Then I was in Barcelona for a few years, did a PhD on the same topic, and eventually came to Austria, where I was leading a research lab for a few years until I spun off together with my co-founders Infrared City, which is my main focus today. Infrared City is a startup, a spin-off from the Austrian Institute of Technology, which actually makes climate simulations accessible to everyone using artificial intelligence.
Nice. I remember like one of our first discussions, and we were talking about AI. And I mean, a lot of people deem AI as being relatively new, but I remember you saying that you were working it way back. I can't remember the exact year that you gave me, but it blew my mind a little bit. So can you tell us a little bit more about what AI looked like then?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I never expected that I would be like an AI boomer, that I would remember myself, 15 years ago. I think 2009 was the first sort of like time I had to code my own neural network, let's put it like that. But like, of course, that's like anyone who does a little bit more sort of like advanced computer science work or computing, at least in architecture, would have gone through that. I was also teaching UCL, and then I kind of like, to be honest, I never expected myself that neural networks, specifically like, machine learning, would become such a huge thing. I remember like, back in 2011, 2012, that it was a bit of a sort of like a hype, but within our communities, our small sort of like computational communities, but like, no one expected really this sort of like crazy hype that we have today, right? And then, just past 5-6 years, I would say, have been a lot more sort of like, maybe 6-7 years have been a lot sort of like more really focused on AI. I remember when I first met Theodore Garanos, my co-founder, back in 2018, where he started like, working more closely with AI as well. And we were discussing for like, something like infrared, but it was very early days. There was no ChatGPT, there was no sort of Midjourneys and stuff like that. And then I do remember the breakthrough of Infrared City, which it's also came like before, Midjourney, ChatGPT craze, because we kind of like showed the world that we could do something so fast that it was almost unbelievable. Like, it was. I've run wind simulations for a very long time in my career, and you have to really patiently wait for 8 hours for something to run. We still do that today for training our models, and it is painful. Like, and then seeing that happening instantly was really sort of like mind blowing, and kind of like that's what gave birth to Infrared City as a startup, as an idea, as a project that we sort of like continuously evolved. Because really, what I think AI fundamentally does really well, and blows people's minds with the ability to cut the biggest computational burdens and admin or sort of like um, let's say resource burdens that you have, right? So like you can run a wind simulation without AI, but it takes an awful lot of time and an awful lot of resources. So this is really where it gets really, really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just looking at the platform, I'm working with you and Infrared City closer. It's really great stuff that's been going on there, and I think this is sort of a little bit of a good segue. Although there's multiple things that I want to pick up on there: the education, you sort of your academic side, your teaching, which we'll come on to later. But I think this would be a good point to let us know a little bit more about Infrared City and what it offers.
Yeah. So Infrared City mainly sort of like a platform for architects and planners and anybody actually working on the development of the urban environment. It's a platform to enable kind of like intelligent, climate-aware decision making. Essentially, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to build, and we've succeeded up to now, is to create a hassle-free framework that allows an architect, a planner, a city, municipality, or sort of like policy maker to really look at a location and a project, and with just a few clicks of few buttons and with just like very basic knowledge of the climate to understand the effect that a new building or an existing building will have on its surrounding environment. So essentially, it's complex physics, simulations, and hardcore tech hidden behind a clever AI assistant that allows you to really understand the effects of your decisions. That's how we put it. Yeah.
And you mentioned one of the key things you mentioned around AI and the breakthrough with, or one of the breakthroughs with Infrared City was the speed and how quickly it can be done. But I guess when you're looking at this platform, it's the access to data and being able to make decisions with also, albeit quicker, but also with a plethora of data that already sits within the platform, right?
Yeah. So like data is today like a big, big topic. Everybody is essentially, wondering how can you use data to help make decisions, how you make money as well, but like also, in our case, make impactful decisions on the built environment. In our case, I'd say there is the data that we've used to train our simulations. So essentially, we take something that's taken a long time because you need to calculate the physics of how the sun's rays hit the building and then hit the street and then warm up the street, etc., etc. So like all this physics involved in calculating things is what we're trying to overcome. So we go directly from the design to the result rather than going through the physics. That's what we're trying to do. So there's a data that we have to use on the back to overcome the physics, which means running a lot of physical simulations before we train a model to predict or to, let's say, predict might be a confusing word, to essentially cut the simulation, the physics simulation out, which the user doesn't ever need to see. And then there's the open data, the available data that tells us, what the climate of Hong Kong and Tokyo is. Essentially, it just tells us the conditions that we have today. And there is also the data of the predictive conditions of how the climate of Hong Kong and Tokyo will be in 2050. So that data is already available. It's available for everyone. We just use the data with our own physics overcoming AI, let's put it like that, to just directly look at the effect on the building. And that's where I think the kind of like secret sauce is. So there's no need for some sort of like crazy amount of data. We know what the weather is like in Hong Kong and the average days of sunshine. We can expect it to be worse, and we're planning for the future's climate, which will be worse. But like that data is available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's amazing. I think that, like, you're right. It's that there's so much out there in the internet, and there's a lot of stuff that's been, building for a long time in terms of data and stuff like that. But it's always been here, a little bit here, there, and everywhere. So being able to bring that into one place and utilize that is great.
So the interesting thing about data, right? Like, if most people think about data, they have like a bad connotation to the word data because they're thinking of their personal data, right? I am talking to you now, like my phone is listening, and I don't know, tomorrow maybe it will like offer me like a data like course on some sort of platform because it just somehow Google doesn't really get who I am and why I don't need that course. But in any case, the scary part of data, the personal data, is one thing, which is definitely scary in today's world. But then there is the other parts of data, which is the sort of like the urban data, the city data, the sort of like IoT data, all of that incredible amount of information that we use every day, that we actually produce every day and we don't use. So the very interesting thing is that there is like petabytes of data every hour being sort of like created around the world that cities do not use. So for me, the interesting thing is like, I don't need to know where you spent your evening last night. I don't want to know what you're going to do tomorrow and where you're going to go for holidays for me to be able to make our world a more livable and sustainable place. But I need and I want to know how the city operates, how the networks of energy and resources and water and electricity are working. And that data should have been publicly available and should have been like completely open to everybody to use, in the sense that we all together own that data. We are the data of the city. We create the data, and therefore we should be able to get access to that data instead of it hiding behind essentially paywalls or organizations, because that's what can help us make sense of how how we develop, use, and adapt our cities for the climate in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. It's a really, really good point. And I think that there's another point that was touched upon briefly there about the amount of data that there is. I don't think it's possible or it may be possible, but really difficult, and only some individuals may be able to do it. But for a human to go through all of that data and pull it into something that's going to end up with a good decision is highly unlikely, or going to take a huge amount of time. So therefore, that's where AI comes into play again. This computer age that we're in, and utilizing what we have at our fingertips to maximize the information that we have and do good with it, like you say, make decisions with it that are going to impact our future and living environment for the better.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned it earlier, and it's one that I am really fascinated in, and we've spoken about it briefly a couple of times. But that's sort of your academic past and your teaching, and what brought you here. And I know it's something you're passionate about. So, if you can you talk us through that in a bit more detail?
Yeah. So the sort of like connection to academia for me is a fundamental one. So like, the past 15 years, I've been trying to decide which side I want to go more into, and I've never managed. And I think that's because I cannot live on one or the other world purely. The importance for me is this essentially, as you go into applying sort of like methods and academic research, as you go into the application, you understand, what part of that blue sky research, academic research, actually has an impact on the world. Like, why I care about infrared cities growth is because I actually want to have an impact on how buildings and cities are designed. I want to make sure that our project reaches the hearts of the designers of this world, so that they can actually use simulation and analytics methods to help them make more informed decisions so that they make better buildings. But at the same time, if I get stuck in the applied side of things, if I only look at, what the market needs, for example, I'd never actually innovate or really try to change things, because I would forget that, the market sometimes goes after certain things that it's used. It's a sort of like, it's a rolling sort of like ball. It just goes after things that it is already used to go after. And, if people didn't sort of like step back and think a little bit, they would never think of, impact financing, for example, of like, why it doesn't only matter, to get a 10x or 20x sort of like growth of your company, but it actually matters like how much carbon footprint did you save by doing this SaaS product. And I think that's where we can actually be really, really for us as a company, because InfraCity does have a huge impact on in the sense of like decarbonization, etc. So academia for me offers this sort of like unique opportunity to see completely new, bright ideas, minds. I teach, the main reason that I teach is to get connected to the students. The students, they're an incredible source of new ideas, lateral thinking, of completely critical sort of like approaches to what we're already doing. And that, that I remember from like the very first days of teaching at UCL, that this is what I really loved. Like there were students that would come to me with very radical ideas of how they could do certain things, and I could sort of like offer some steering on how they could technically achieve those things. And then I was like, wow, like, it's like a superpower, right? Really, like, you're getting the attention of a very eager and the ground sort of like breaking and very radical mind. I think that's sort of like that's the main reason that I love academia. So now we have also this new program, Master in AI for Architecture and the Built Environment in IAC, the Institute of Vast Architecture of Catalonia, where essentially we're trying to bring something new, which is like not just how do you go from being an architect that learns architecture in a traditional way, or like a designer or some other discipline, into an AI tech enabled sort of like architect, but also the entrepreneurship aspect of it, which is essentially how do you value what you just became? How do you value what you created? How do you sell it instead of like just going into an other architecture company and just work in the same way that we've been working for the past decades? How do you like become something new? How do you become the best of yourself? And I think that's what I really love about the new program. I have a bit of experience in teaching like in different universities in Europe and the States, and my frustration has always been, is like, it's the same frustration I have probably with the industry, is that things do not change as much. So there are one of the things that I find good in what I'm doing in IAC is that, it can be a very innovative environment. It can be a very fast changing environment. So that's what I'm trying to do there as well.
Yeah. Oh, nice. And do you see, like you mentioned there, you taught in a few different places in the world, and that there are frustrations that you maybe have there. But do you see that in certain parts of the world that it's adapting to, like as you mentioned, the technologies and stuff quicker, or is it generally on a par wherever you're looking?
So it's actually very interesting. Like we're witnessing a change, right? Like I'll try to say this in the most sort of like benign way I can. I have probably strong opinions on the geopolitics of this world, but like I'll try to keep them to myself. Like the West has traditionally believed that it is the sort of like in the forefront of research and technology, and the US for sure believed that for a long time. I don't think that is true anymore, and I'm saying that with very cautious way, with a very cautious way. I've been to Asia enough times this past year to see like things that I didn't even expect, while I have like quite a lot of open mind in what's happening over there. And the world is moving fast. Middle Eastern universities are fast progressing. Asian Chinese institutions are fast progressing. I'm pretty sure there's like very little anymore to envy of the Stanfords and the Cambridges and the sort of like, MITs of this world. Although, of course, the research in the US is still like, very, very much ahead. I'd have to say also for the UK, post Brexit, a lot of things changed. We all understand that. We probably feel sad about what has changed. I do think that eventually there will be a reunification of the European sort of academic ecosystem. The UK is still leading research in many, many places. And I think that what Europe needs to do, because I feel myself European, and I have to say, I'm here, I'm operating here. I just generally feel that I'm sort of like mostly connected here. But the European research needs to catch up. I believe that we have probably, if not the best, on the best sort of like foundational research ecosystems in the world. I do think that the institutions here, even the old kind of like monolithic institutions of Europe, do have really, really deep research foundations. But the entrepreneurship, sort of like the taking that really cutting edge research, this really deep, let's say, foundational knowledge, and putting it into a fast moving, hugely adapting and changing market is the difficult part. And of course, the European ecosystem is overly regulated, and it's overly sort of like, it's very difficult to operate in, but that's also what we love as Europeans. Like there's protectivism on rights, on legality, on other things, which we think we should keep doing. It's a tricky question how you go from here to I'm going to go lightning fast in I'm an academic spin-off. Research spin-off from the largest RTO in Austria, right? And if I see how long it took me and how difficult it was sometimes, it should have been like a lot faster. It should have been a lot easier for me to go from, cutting edge research project to super fast sort of like growth mode. But it happens, and nevertheless, if I can say one thing, like all of us should probably contribute to make this more to help more this ecosystem, and especially in architecture and planning, especially in the world's number one climate change contributors, in terms of cities that are like one of the worst, in relation to the climate crisis. We urgently need change. I keep saying this thing. I've read it a few times. I don't even know if it's that accurate. That McKinsey says we're the second least innovative industry after agriculture and hunting. That's a problem, right? And we're the most impactful industry in terms of climate crisis. So we have to definitely move fast.
Yeah, I mean, funny you say that. I think I've read that as well, or I've certainly heard that elsewhere. What do you think is going to be the one thing that stops it, though? Is it the governing bodies? Like, well, obviously, if they're starting, and again, maybe they're a bit behind with in terms of some of the courses in academia they're teaching. But if that's starting to change, then what is going to be the one thing that slows it down? Because arguably, we're way behind where we need to be already.
The thing that slows it down is probably like the thing that slows down everything in relation to innovation in Europe, or integration in general. The super decisive integration moment is what slows it down, I suggest. I mean, even if you look at the Horizon Europe and other sort of like instruments, it's like tons of funding in the European Union. It's like, I think that we're the most lush in terms of funding ecosystem in the world. And then if you look at how this money is distributed and how the money, how the reporting, the sort of like the 1,000 committees around committees that do all of this, it could be faster. And I'm not in any way saying that it should be a purely market-driven R&D ecosystem. I don't believe that we should go into let the market come in and let the sort of like capital, and that's the only way we can solve the problem. No, I don't actually believe that. I believe that we need stronger ties, faster integration, movement of people, movement of knowledge, unification of large institutions, incentivizing them to unite research, unite innovation, and unite entrepreneurship. So I think that's perhaps the only thing that could help us move fast. Like, you can start a project in the Austrian Institute of Technology, go to Delft, continue, keep your IPR, get Delft and AIT to solve the IPR immediately, and then end up in Cambridge and advancing this in an entrepreneurship innovation sort of like incubator with everything, done like legally easy and with no hassle. That's probably my dream for this ecosystem.
Yeah. No, that does sound a little. It sounds perfect, to be fair. A little bit dreamy, yeah. But it sounds to me like there's a lot of want for it. We speak to a lot of people speaking to a lot of industries and companies in the built environment space, and everyone's crying out for it. And I think with platforms like your own, I mean, that helps highlight how technology can definitely make a difference within the industry. But ultimately, I think when it boils down to it, it's the real change comes from the youths and individuals that are coming through our educational system now. Really, we can do as much as what we can do now, and raise the flag and talk about it as much as we can. But I think ultimately, it's the real change is going to come with change from the younger people coming through and what they learn, essentially.
Yeah. So I love what you're saying. So I'm just like, we have like, a few groups here and there that I'm involved in that are sort of like either AI or sort of like computational related in architecture, right? And I have like this one group, it's a WhatsApp group eventually that like one young entrepreneur in this field has like started. And then I see all the, there's like constant messages in there like about the future of AI in architecture, engineering, construction. Like, and I find that super interesting. Like, it's like everybody is expecting the profession to go through a radical shift, a radical change. And I truly hope it will happen. I believe the architecture, at least in architecture, which I know a little bit better, model that the business model we have up to now is dead already. Like this sort of like, one-man show, I don't know, X name has all the knowledge in the world to lead every project that is important, and somehow there's like a whole team around them that follow their legacy. And like I don't believe that makes any sense anymore. And I don't think it made sense before, but it was just sort of like more we were going through the ego period of architecture. Perhaps I think that eventually data will take over, sort of like KPIs will take over, meaningful conclusions on how well a building performs and a part of a city performs based on data will take over. And then I think this whole boom, because this is a boom happening right now, of AI, data-driven, computer, like machine-driven decision support and decision-making tools will become the main arsenal of tools for the architect. So instead of, I want to do this iconic building and everything around me should follow my, I don't know, paper wrapping or hand drawing sort of like idea, there will be a point where people will sit together around the table. Everybody will bring their data and their sort of like suggestions and their solutions, and then we will have to synthesize, which is what architecture should have been, synthesize these different opinions, different views, different needs into buildings that make sense for everybody. So I do think this will change, but I think it will change mainly because of the importance of the impact of the output. So essentially, if I am ex-architect today, I'm just gonna not put a name to it, I usually do, but if I'm ex-architect today and I design a building which I think is like fantastic because I saw it in my dream or whatever, I don't have like that much accountability for the effect, for the impact of what the building I designed is. So essentially, I don't, if that building sort of like is leaking from the roof, I mean, there's some accountability. There's a specific example I'm thinking of. But if it creates a sort of like unbearable in terms of heat and comfort environment, I'd still say, oh, but it looks beautiful, right? I think that this accountability will eventually come into play, and then say, you need to make sure that what you're building, what you're putting in the world, doesn't make the world like a much worse place. And you also have to, when you connect the value of your flat that you will buy and Battersea Power Station, sort of like, whatever it is, if you're buying, your famous ex-singer and you buy this penthouse, but that penthouse is sort of like unbearable to live in, there is, there's going to be some accountability for your decision, for your designs, for your, essentially for what you brought to this world. And I think that's where hopefully we will go.
Yeah, I think there's that desire, isn't there? And we, as human beings, I think we somewhat like to paint ourselves in the light that we're doing something for the greater good all of the time, or at least, there's an element of that. But I think ultimately what we're saying here is the tools that will become available to us will allow us to work for the greater good rather than for our individual
yeah. Like vanity, perhaps.
Vanity, right? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, just maybe a point on that. Like, I'm sounding too sort of like cheesy and naive here. Like, will the world become a better place because, I don't know, architecture will change? I think not just architecture, but everything eventually will be driven by the economics of the climate crisis. So the climate crisis comes with certain economics. It's not, the market will have to follow the climate crisis as it does every crisis. And I think that will trickle down to buildings. Of course, it will trickle down to planes and cars and everything else. But we have underestimated how important that effect will be on buildings and the cities of the future. It is really not fully understood today that in 30, 40 years, you might not be able to survive outside a building in a summer in big parts of the world that were not possible before, that did not need that sort of like treatment before. And that will bring also, network failures, grid failures, etc. So then we're talking about the significance of the shift from, this, I buy a few square meters with a view to Thames, and I'm optimizing for the view, to I'm buying a shelter, which was what it used to be in the beginning.
Yeah. It's kind of like it's trying to not create for yourself in the here and now, isn't it? To an extent. I know certainly from sort of my experience in doing what I do and digital marketing and online and websites and stuff is. I mean, the internet is relatively new in the grand scheme of things, right? And I think designers in this world it's changed a little bit due to legislation, but are guilty of designing for themselves and what they believe's nice, rather than thinking about the greater good or the collective, which could be accessibility and all of the things that come alongside that. Now that's obviously like a smaller scale, and it's the digital world of which everyone interacts with in the same way we all interact with the physical world. But I think designing outside of your own immediate need, and for that, and with architecture in mind and the built environment in mind, is generations along the line where actually what we believe now, or certainly here in the UK, being an unbearable summer at late 20s, because the buildings here are made to insulate rather than release heat, or at least the older buildings are that I'm sitting in now, that in, as you say, 40, 50 years time is just not going to be. It is not going to be like we're not going to be able to cope with that.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was like reading 5 days ago, a week ago, I was reading on Guardian this sort of like article about sort of like unsellable flats, unsellable. I'm not sure if it was office spaces or flats in London. So there are like places that have been designed for a different world, like the British weather, the London weather is mainly preoccupied with heating rather than cooling, and therefore those buildings don't necessarily have a cooling infrastructure, right? And how quickly can we go from London today to London looking like Hong Kong, where there's air conditioning units hanging around from buildings? I'm not sure that's very possible with the City of London's restrictions on how things look like. How quickly can you turn your like beautiful backyards into essentially air conditioning service spaces. If you go to, I don't know, any Southeast Asia city, you see there are streets which are like streets that you pass by, and then there are streets that you don't ever enter because they're like just where the air conditioning units, external units are. So they're so hot. If you look from a top-down heat sort of like scanning camera, you'll probably see like red, blue, right, like everywhere, because you have to use somewhere that heat has to go, and it's maybe dystopian the way I describe it, but like you'll have to cool down the whole of London by 2050, like at some point. It's still 2025. We have 25 more years to go. I saw this really nice graph. And it's just like, if we don't do anything, we just continue, it's a 3 degrees more world that we're going to live in. If you just do everything now, it's still 1.5 degrees more. It's like still this scorching heat. So it will get a lot worse. And by the time it will get worse, we'll have to find really radical ways of adapting. That's why I'm talking about, like, the market of the crisis, the economics of the crisis. How quickly can you fit cooling units to the whole of London, because every penthouse will be pretty unbearable after a certain time. And if you start thinking of like that goes into when you're buying flat right now you're buying flat, you're just looking, I don't know, Zoopla or whatever, whatever still exists in London. I haven't been there for like 10 years, but you just go in some whatever sort of like broker, and you're looking for flats, and you say, okay, this is near the train station, it's like X square meters, it has a backyard, beautiful. If I could give you, and this is what we're planning to do eventually with it, is like if I could give you like a number of how many days in the summer this place will be unbearable to live in, you make a very different decision in how you buy that place. It would have a very different price.
Yeah. You're right. You are right. It's a fascinating future world that's got to change quite quickly to be enjoyable, because I think about London. I know London fairly well, and part of my love for London is, I mean, there's some beautiful modern buildings, but it is that historic, the history there and the history of architecture there. But there's going to have to come a point where ultimately, if that's too difficult to change or amend, or as you say, for the sake of the future, you got to consider losing some of that. You have to.
Yeah.
There's got to be a balance, because ultimately there won't be a future. But then I guess you then go into the argument or the conversation or the debate around cities themselves and the way that we're currently working. Is that still going to be the way that we'll be able to work in 2050, or is it going to be a lot more spread out given the digital world, which is a debate that we will probably have to have another time. Because I've got another question.
Yes, absolutely.
What I want to get for an idea from you, we've spoken a lot about how the industry is and your past, what's led you up to Infrared City and the work you're doing in Infrared City now. But what I'd like to highlight to our listeners, if possible, are some of the challenges you've faced along the way, and sort of challenges that you might be facing now, and how you're overcoming them.
Oh yeah, there's challenges all along the way. I'd say that if I start from early days, I think my biggest challenge was I didn't really like architecture. Like when it was taught to me in the beginning, I don't know, maybe I'm a too practical person. I didn't really enjoy the sort of like, oh, this is art. It's just, essentially a philosophical approach that I didn't perhaps particularly like that. But like, then I quickly escaped that because I found, the sort of like research side of architecture, the more sort of like analytical research, let's say, side of architecture, where, things are calculated, things are measured. And I think my biggest challenge in the beginning is, accepting that architecture is still sort of like design is still sort of like a multidisciplinary practice that where sort of like the scientific part is only a very small part, which is something I wanted to change, and I hope I'm still trying to change, making the scientific part a bit like larger. The other challenge for me, and I know it sounds like a little bit sort of like repeating myself, but like it's ego, right? Like there's so much ego in architecture, and my ego as well. I mean, everybody brings their ego about their opinions about sort of like what is great and what is not, without again enough science to back it. So there's a good thing about being, I don't know, a mechanical engineer. Like, yeah, you can have your ego, but then you have to somehow make this thing work. And there's only one way that this thing can work, or at least like only a few ways that a thing can work. So the other thing I was struggling with was, especially when I was at Foster's, like with the ego. And then I think afterwards, going into a sort of like more academic environment, then I had a challenge with how much like, blue sky, or how like ideas there are there, how many sort of like inapplicable sort of like ideas about architecture there are. And I was like, okay, I just need to go back to practice a bit for that. And I think, today the challenge is everybody in my field, like essentially entrepreneurial AI in architecture, everybody says kind of like the same thing. Architects don't have the money and the sort of like, the power and the, enough sort of like resources to do all of these AI super duper whatever things. The developers have them, or I don't know, the cities have them, or whatever. And I don't believe that's a good enough excuse. I believe that we just need to bring more technology into architecture, bring more AI, bring more data, allow it more, and train our architects as well to be more entrepreneurs, innovators. I don't believe that, I believe architects always had to innovate. Architects had to innovate how construction would work, how materials would work, how even aesthetics would work, and even do very complex mathematics with it. Recently, I was debating this online about sort of like, the no straight lines in the Parthenon, right? Like that these tricking the human brain that something is straight while it isn't. Even aesthetics have tricks and have also mechanics. So I think the systemic thinking, the mechanical thinking, the sort of like, the innovation and sort of like, becoming again this crazy discovery person of architecture, I think something we should definitely bring back. So that's my latest challenge is of course related to market and getting my product to the market, which is essentially what every entrepreneur is challenged with. So I think it's about like moving this market, innovating this market. Yeah.
Okay. Amazing. Angelos, so looking into the future now, I mean, I think last time we chatted, I was talking about flying cars and stuff like that. But for what do you think the future is of AI architecture and therefore then infrared sea?
They've got flying cars in Asia, I've heard, but I've not seen them myself. No, I'm joking. I mean, I never really understood why people wait for flying cars. I mean, like we barely have like cars that are moving on the road properly, so I'm not sure about the flying ones.
Do you know what it is? It's my childhood. I remember reading a book. I can't remember what book it was, and they had flying cars, and it was something around 2020 in the book anyway. And yeah, we're not there yet.
Right. It looks like we're not there, but we were definitely past 1984. So I'm not sure which one was the worst book. No, but I'm just like saying, definitely flying cars is a future that we think of. Like, but honestly, like for me, I have this image of a future city, right? And flying cars is definitely a possibility. But I care more about sort of like, why the hell are we not walking around in a jungle? Right? I really don't get it. And what I mean by that, it's like not in a jungle per se, but like I see Vienna, right? Like renovating parts of the city, and instead of like putting like 50% green on the street, there's 90% hard surfaces and 10% green. Like I think we're missing the point here. Like we can put green in the city. We can walk around, take our scooters and electric bikes and stuff around still, and we can have it being a lot more greener than it is. So I think that we're missing a little bit the point of like how much more green a city should be. And I have this, maybe in London it's a little bit hard to think of it because you have this, very traditional image of the semi-detached, exactly identical houses that have a whole row, and there is a bit of green, a little bit more than I would say in Athens. But I have this example of Athens, like Athens, the city of Athens is a sort of like really concrete jungle type of city, right? And the amazing thing about city of Athens is like there's so much outdoor area in the buildings like existing already. Like every building has at least a 1 to 3 meter balcony. Balconies like the ones you have like in the UK, they don't work in Greece. Like they have to be a proper balcony. You have to put like a chair and a table outside. You could greenify that. You could really have a super green Athens where everything is plants hanging off sort of like buildings, and that could significantly change the effectiveness. But like, how do we go from today's world into this beautiful idea of flying cars or green cities that I have? And I think, again, systemic change in the way we understand value and our practice. I'm talking specifically about architecture and planning because that's what I understand the most. But you have to be driven by something else to be able to deliver something else. So like if you come to me, I'm an architect, you come to me and say, I want a new house and I want it to be in this area. So like, I'm going to try to maximize your value by maximizing your square meters, you're maximizing your, how much you can build. If you do that in Greece, that's a very specific thing you have to do. If you do it in London, you have to maximize its value or whatever. And I'm going to do only a few things, right? Like there's not much I can do. Then it's interior and how to make it look beautiful. But like, honestly, like, we need to really, really quickly leave from that and get into, again, I'm building a shelter for you. You have to think that you have to survive crazy weather in that place. So we need to get into that mentality, the impact-driven economy, and by impact I mean the climate impact-driven economy. The climate impact-driven economy is the future I want to go into, and that's why I'm putting all my effort in infrared cities development.
Yeah, no, I just want to pick up on a point because I think I had a similar vision not that long ago about, if you like, living under the jungle canopy. I agree, and I genuinely believe that we restrict the future of our cities, not everywhere, but it's clearly obvious in some cities, by that history that is there. Like, for example, Athens. I'd imagine Rome's similar, where you got great history, where it wasn't necessarily a problem then. They didn't understand climate maybe as well as what we do now, and we're restricting the progress we need to make there by some of that history. But that's one thing. But I can just imagine a world where the trees are everywhere, the green is everywhere, and we live a lot closer to nature, which obviously does bring some potential issues, but there we go. I think wherever we end up, there's going to be issues and challenges that we're going to need to address, and essentially that's what keeps us busy day to day, or the 9 to 5.
Yeah. Do you know there was this bridge? I don't know. It was called the Sky Bridge, the Hedderwick Bridge, the whatever. Like I don't remember how it's called. Which was supposed to be between, I think, Chelsea and Embankment or something like around those, between Chelsea and Battersea, or post the Battersea part, post Albert Bridge or something, where it was going to be like a pedestrian bridge, and it would be like all lush, and it would be essentially a park on the Thames. And that project was abandoned because the economy of the project didn't work out. Initially, there would be a sort of like a paid entrance part, which was like, okay, this is a bridge that doesn't make sense. How do I cross a bridge and pay toll on it? Then it would be the Sky Bridge, because Sky would put like massive advertisements on it. And I'm like thinking, how is it possible? London is, one of the biggest cities in the world, doesn't have the economy like of impact in place to just put a damn, park bridge on top of Thames and just have that there for the, betterment of the city. Maybe I'm wrong with the data, or maybe I'm wrong with the incentive or anything. Don't quote me on that, but I feel that this was a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I'd agree. I know they've started, I'm sure there's been a couple of similar things. I think highway crossings and stuff like that that have gone up in the UK for nature crossings, if you like. Slightly different, not in London, but it's all becoming a lot more topical. But you're right, it still seems like there are certain things that are being blockers that are being put in place for the wrong reasons.
It's everywhere. It's essentially that the economy of change is not there yet.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so future, real quick. I say real quick. If we can do it real quick, what is the future, next 5 years for Infrared City?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we aim to do really is get in the hands of every decision maker. Like whether imagine you're the city, right? You're deciding whether you're going to put that bridge on, or you're the architect that's designing that bridge, and maybe bridges are not our focus, but it could be, the next building, the next, I don't know, the next walkie-talkie or whatever, right? I, envision a world where like you can use Infrared City, all right, and then no matter what, design system you're in, or no matter sort of like where, you're able to interact in a natural way with our framework within Fluent, which you can do today, but like, I'm talking about a supercharged version of that, where you can ask questions about what would, contribute to a more sustainable design. And you can get data-driven, scientifically sort of like backed answers about your decisions. And, you can literally say, if I put a window for my building right here, how many hours of daylight will it give me when I'm sitting on this desk? And what happens if I make it 2 meters larger? And, how much would that affect my heat intake in the summer and my daylight in the winter? And you should be able to know that with zero friction. And that's where I think our goal is, to be that zero friction, this kind of like a supercharged design, sustainable design assistant by your side, like this sustainable design copilot that helps you make decisions that make your buildings more and your cities more sustainable.
Amazing. Well, it's about getting it in the right hands of the right people so that they can use it to maximize it and make the right decisions. That's brilliant, Angelos. Thank you for spending the time to talk with me and share your experiences and insights with our listeners. We'll wrap it up there, but until the next time we talk, take care.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
See you later.